What if you wrote something so amazing, so profound, that God himself had to step in and help you finish it? Well, that's pretty much the incredible story we're diving into today. It's all about a divine poem, where the author, well, let's just say he wasn't the only one holding the pen.
Now, I know what you're thinking. That sounds like something straight out of a myth, right? But this is the actual story that surrounds a 12th century Sanskrit poem called the Gīta Govinda, and it really sets the stage for a narrative where that line between, the divine and the devotee, it just completely melts away.
So the story goes like this. In the holy city of Puri, India, Lord Jagannath, the deity of the main temple, overhears a young gardener's daughter singing verses from this poem. And he wasn't just pleased, no, he was completely and utterly captivated. Get this, he literally leaves the temple altar and follows the sound of her voice right into a vegetable field. The next morning, the temple priests come in and they're just floored. They find thorns and dirt snagged all over the Lord's divine garments. It was physical proof of his secret little musical adventure. So, you gotta ask, right? Who on earth could write something with that kind of power?
Well, the man behind the poem was Jayadeva Goswāmī. And believe me, his own life story is just as incredible, just as divinely tangled as the poem he's famous for.
So, let's set the scene. Jayadeva was born back in the early 12th century in Bengal. This guy was brilliant, okay? He was a court pandit, which is basically a top royal scholar for King Lakshman Sen. But his real influence, whoa, it echoed for centuries. His work became absolutely foundational for later saints, like the great Śrī Chaitanya Mahaprabhu hundreds of years later.
But here's a really interesting piece of his personal story. Jayadeva was a dedicated ascetic, someone who lives a life of really strict spiritual discipline. And he had taken a personal vow of lifelong celibacy. So, marriage, totally not in his plans. But, as you're about to see, the divine had a very different idea.
Okay, the story of his marriage is just wild. So there's this devout man who prays to Lord Jagannath for a child and is blessed with a daughter, Padmavati. When she's old enough to marry, her father goes back to the temple and asks the Lord for guidance, and Lord Jagannath gives a direct, unmistakable command, "Give her to my devotee Jayadeva." So the father brings Padmavati to Jayadeva, who's probably thinking, whoa, hold on, I've got this vow. But I mean, what do you do when you get a direct order from God? You can't really argue. He understood this was a divine arrangement, and he humbly accepted Padmavati as his wife. In this whole divinely arranged marriage, it's the perfect setup for the single most famous story about the Gīta Govinda's creation. We're talking about a moment of pure doubt, a crisis of faith, and a miracle that would define this poem forever. All right, so picture this. Jayadeva is in the zone. He's composing his masterpiece. The words are just flowing, feeling like they're coming straight from a divine source. And then, bam, he hits a wall. He gets to one specific verse describing a really intense, intimate moment between the divine lovers, Radha and Krishna, and he just freezes.
This was the line, Dehi padapallavam udaram. It translates to something like, "O Radhe, offer the fresh buds of your enchanting feet as an ornament upon my head." So here you have Lord Krishna, the Supreme Being, pleading with his beloved Radha to place her feet, which he calls delicate flower buds, right on his head to soothe his heartache.
For Jayadeva, this was a full-blown theological crisis. It just felt like a step too far. I mean, could the Supreme Lord, the master of the entire universe, really humble himself that completely? To ask for his lover's feet on his own head? It felt almost blasphemous to write down. His hand trembled. He just couldn't do it.
And this is where things get truly miraculous. Troubled and unsure, Jayadeva leaves his manuscript and goes to the river to bathe, just to clear his head. While he's gone, someone who looks exactly like him shows up at his house. This look-alike tells his wife Padmavati, "The inspiration just came to me." He sits down and writes the exact verse Jayadeva had hesitated over. Then he eats the lunch Padmavati had prepared and just vanishes. When the real Jayadeva returns and sees the verse written there in perfect, beautiful script, he understands immediately. The Lord himself had stepped in.
And his reaction wasn't pride. It was profound humility. He turned to his wife and said, "How fortunate you are. The Lord himself appeared and gave darshan to you. Look at me, how unfortunate I am. I couldn't see the Lord." He realized Krishna himself had come, in his form, to personally complete the verse and confirm its divine truth. And this just brilliantly shows the poem's core message, that divine love, it transcends all our normal rules and hierarchies. So, with the poem now complete, and you could say, co-authored by God himself, its legacy was sealed. It became immortal, sparking a living tradition that is still going strong to this very day.
Yeah, the Gīta Govinda is not just some historical artifact. It was cherished by saints like Śrī Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. To this day, its verses are sung every single day in the Jagannath Puri temple. In fact, they literally put Lord Jagannath to sleep under a bedsheet that has the poem's text written on it. You know, it's almost like the Lord himself became the, let's call it the PR director for his own devotees' work.
Now, as with many ancient figures, there is a little bit of a historical debate about where Jayadeva spent his final days. Some accounts say he returned to his village in Bengal, but others, supported by some very respected scholars, maintain that he passed away in Puri, the city that was so central to his life story.
But while historians can debate the biographical details, the poem he left behind, it's completely unambiguous. It makes a bold, undisputed claim about its own power and its own unique, transcendent sweetness.
See, at the very end of the Gīta Govinda, Jayadeva basically throws down a poetic gauntlet. He directly challenges every other sweet thing you can think of in the material world, one by one, comparing them to the divine nectar of his poem. Just listen to this. First up, sugar, the very definition of sweet, right? He says, "Hey sugar, you are harsh. Compared to this poem, you're rough, like sand."
Then he turns to grapes. "Hey, grapes, who will look at you?" Essentially saying with the Gīta Govinda around, who would even bother with you? He even takes on Amrita, the mythical nectar of the gods, the drink of immortality, and he declares, "Hey nectar, you are like death." Lifeless in comparison.
What about sweet milk? He says it now tastes like plain water. And the ripe mango, the absolute king of fruits, its only choice is to go and weep because it's been so thoroughly outclassed.
And finally, in a bold move, he challenges what many would consider the height of earthly pleasure. He says, "Hey lips of a beautiful woman, you have no place to go. You've been utterly and completely surpassed."
And that leaves us with the final, powerful question that Jayadeva's work poses to all of us. What does it mean for a spiritual experience to be sweeter, more real, and more lasting than any pleasure the material world could possibly offer? You see, the Gīta Govinda isn't just a story or a song. It's a claim. It's a challenge to consider that there's a spiritual reality so profound it makes every other experience, every other taste, just pale in comparison.